Hi, I'm Catherine Bennett and welcome to the Cyber Chat studio. In this episode, I'm very excited to introduce to you Emma Coker, founder and chief alignment officer at Inbetween. Fantastic. And you know, I'm going to laugh here because this has taken me quite a few takes, so apologies. But lovely to have you here. I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. I suppose just before we actually go into a little bit more about Inbetween, fantastic, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. But firstly, welcome, and it's lovely to see you.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so delighted that we finally got to do this. We've been talking about it for such a long time, and I've been watching all of them. And then you said, "Oh, are you free?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So thank you so much for today.
And it's going to be all the worthwhile watching as well, because it's been, you know, it's super exciting listening to everything that you have in store. So, before I go into the exciting bits and pieces, I would like to know a lot more about you, as I'm sure obviously the listeners and viewers would. So before I kind of go into a little bit more about, you know, cybersecurity and bits and pieces, tell me, what do you like to do outside of work? What's your kind of go-to hobbies, interests, bits and pieces?
I was very lucky. My grandfather had an allotment growing up, and so I sort of watched him get dirty and, you know, put things in the soil. And then I think 10 years ago I got a property with quite a large garden, and I thought, oh, I'll give it a go. So for me, it's getting into the soil at the weekend, it's digging, it's weeding, it's just completely shutting my head off and getting back to nature. That's what I absolutely love doing.
And it's the headspace, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think sometimes when you're in that much of a hectic environment and things are busy and you're clock watching, it's actually quite nice to do something where you're not, oh, I've got to be on a call in 5 minutes, or I've got to run this, you know, meeting in such and such. So it's quite nice to have that bit of downtime. I guess what would be quite nice is if we had a little bit more of like a summer or a spring, we had a bit more time in the garden rather than the weather that we currently have.
I do. At this time of year, I'm kind of like thinking, how many more weeks have I got before I then have to change and go into a different hobby or think of something else? But also the thing about gardening is you don't have to wear matching socks. And that is one of the things.
That's definitely a bonus. That's definitely an upside though. So you'd have to think of a way that you can perhaps maybe, like, you've got a greenhouse or something inside.
I do have, well, not a greenhouse so much as I have a shed, so I can at least, you know, think about what I'm going to plant next year.
A she shed rather than a heat.
Correct.
Man shed.
Yes.
Fantastic. So a couple of other quick questions. You know, favourite place, if you could spend, I don't know, 10 days somewhere, anywhere in the world, where would your go-to be?
Well, I was really lucky to go to a place called Sedona in Arizona in 2013. And I've been there 3 times, and it's kind of like my spiritual home. It's known for its scientific reasons. There's really good points to go there. It's very close to the Grand Canyon. It's about 8-hour drive. So it's one of those wonderful places where you feel at peace. Yeah. And I can't go there enough, to be honest.
Never. I can't say as I've been there, but it sounds quite a nice place to go to. Always, I've got a big long bucket list of all the places that I'd quite like to see, but I've never heard of that one, so that's quite interesting. So what's a nice, interesting fact? Well, it doesn't have to be nice, but an interesting fact about yourself that perhaps maybe some of our viewers or listeners would not necessarily know about you.
I was the granddaughter of a real 007.
Ooh.
So not one from the films, but my grandfather was a real double agent. And I didn't find that out officially until I was in my 30s because of the Secrets Act. And he, again, weirdly, all of his work was done out in Arizona in the desert. And then I just find myself finding an attraction with that. So, that's been fascinating to wait for the government to release all that information, then to logistically look at what he was doing. It was fascinating.
Wow, so you didn't think of going into perhaps maybe like the MI5 or the secret underworld or anything like that? Or?
Well, he didn't really have a very good end, so it sort of put me off.
Okay, well, maybe not then,
No.
But that's very interesting. I think it's, sometimes you don't know like history or family history until perhaps maybe sometimes it's too late. But I'm intrigued, and it's I know obviously from our point of view, we obviously met when we actually started talking. Although we obviously worked at the same organisation, but we started talking about book writing.
Yes.
Obviously, you're a published author, which is fantastic. What kind of inspired you to go into writing or to release a book? Where did that kind of come from, really?
I'd always wanted to. I'd always wanted to as a kid. I'd grown up on Enid Blyton and Winnie the Pooh, and I always had my head in a book. And then at school I loved creative writing, and then the syllabus changed and it was more about English literature, and I was not really into that at all. So when I left, I then found, going into my roles in sales, Yellow Pages for instance, when you had to put an advert together, you had to be quite punchy and succinct, and you also had to bring it to life with words. So I just sort of knew I had this, and then I think I got to a point where somebody said to me, would you like to do a collaboration book? And the collaboration book was all about coming back from adversity. And we all have that happen in our lives. And it just so happened that at that particular point, 26 authors decided to get together and write a book. And that sort of gave me the confidence to then go, oh yeah, I can do this, I think, with the support. It's quite hard work. Anyone that's done it knows how hard it is and how much you beat yourself up. But I think it was the pure fascination from a child to think, I would have changed the way that maybe Mallory's Towers ended on that particular note, or maybe I would have changed. And so I thought, well, the power of writing, I think that's quite nice to have that moment of seeing something take a different turn. Yeah. And that's what inspired me, really.
It's nice to actually speak to somebody else who has written a book, because third one now is out and it's done, but I've kind of stalled a little bit before book 4, because you may have had the same thing. You kind of write it, you put a lot of effort and emotion to some degree into it, and it could be the best book in the world, but somebody might read it and go, didn't really like that, or it wasn't for me. And that's absolutely fine, because people have their opinions, but I think you do get very critical on thinking that you're going to write a book and everybody's going to love it. And you know, for me, apart from it taking a long time, the feeling that you get once you've actually written the book and it's out there, it is, I felt, thank God for that. I've done it.
I've been reading Elizabeth Gilbert's Creative Magic, and in that she talks about the woes of a writer and how you stifle yourself, and that, you know, you block yourself, and that really you need to just write for yourself and your best friend. Yeah. Because 80% of books that are bought aren't written and I'm like, really? 80% of books aren't read? Wow. What? But it's true, isn't it? And I think once you get over that, you just get more comfortable, and it's about your personal achievement. So well done. Definitely.
Well, I think my biggest thing was my mum and dad were my biggest critics. So if I kind of wrote something in A-level English, they go, no, spelling mistake, capital letter, full stop, all those kind of things. And when every time I released one, I actually gave it to them first and said, like, read it. And it was when my dad said, I'm really proud of you. That was really good. And that, for me, I don't care how many other people didn't like it, but for him to say it, really proud of you, it was like, tick, done. Still not going to do the 4th one, but not yet. Yeah, so I need a 6-month holiday, I think, to finish that one.
Maybe you could do a collaboration book. Imagine if you got a few females together, you picked a couple of topics.
What should we write about?
I don't know. We'll have to think about that.
No, it sounds, again, I think it's down to that achievement thing, isn't it? Through life and stuff. So bringing me on to my next question, and I ask a lot of people this: where do you see yourself in the next 5-10 years time, or, you know, even shorter, perhaps maybe 6 months, a year? What's your kind of ultimate goal, if you have one?
I think I have spent the last couple of years thinking only 6 months ahead, and so I've had to retrain my brain. When you do what I do for a living, you're constantly talking to people about 3 to 5 years, and you just don't do it yourself. So I have actually decided that I've got a 5-year plan, which is something I'm looking forward to doing. I want to travel for the next couple of years. I'm very lucky with the business that I don't have to be based just in one postcode. And in fact, it was an estate agent that said to me not so long ago that he realised he had something like 11 summers left until he was 70.
Oh gosh.
And then I started counting on my finger like this, and I was like, oh my God, I've only got 16 summers left until I'm 70. I don't really want to spend it in TW17. So that for me is, I want to see as many places as I can, but also my health is something I've really focused on this next 5 years. I think I've recently posted that, you know, 54 is like a big year for me. I had parents who were smokers, so I'm 37 days nicotine free completely, and I've suddenly found this zest for wanting to get back into being really fit and healthy again. Right. So I think those are the things: travel more, and be energetic, really, because I think that really helps all of you, from your mental health to your physical health.
Absolutely. It's, I guess, what is important to us. We live in such a society at the moment where, you know, we are big drinkers, we are big smokers, although obviously that's kind of moving towards vaping world and bits and pieces, but I think health is quite important for all of them. Couple more questions kind of before we move into Inbetween Fantastic, because again, this is kind of the biggest thing for me. I'm super excited about this, but, you know, how did you get into the cybersecurity world? And some people, they kind of dropped into it. Other people, it's, you know, a clear path or a clear goal. What was your kind of, how did you end up in this world?
So I was working for a hardware manufacturer that sold flat screens, and I had a team, an internal sales team and an external sales team. And there was one of my sales reps who sat down with me one day, and he said, have you heard of Dr. Solomon's. And I was like, who? And he said, have you heard of McAfee? And I was like, who? And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, you need to get into software. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I got a phone call from a headhunting company that had placed me before. And she said, because you looked after this particular two partners, this software organisation, and they were in security software. And I was like, what? Antivirus actually was what they called it.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
What's antivirus? Would you like to go and, explore this opportunity? And so I drove to the offices in Windsor, and they talked about antivirus, which back then was CDs.
Yep.
But I think it was because I'd had a good footholding in Channel, and the two partners that they wanted me to look after didn't have anyone supplying them with any antivirus at the time. And so I thought, actually, that's quite a nice inroad, because I can learn and educate them at the same time. So it wasn't really like, I didn't wake up one morning and go, oh, I want to go into a unique piece of software. It was one of my reps who'd said to me, have you thought about it? And I was like, no, I haven't. And I got it. It sort of really connected with me. I could understand. Once I understood the technical point of it, I understood exactly what it is. And I still think today it's one of those stories that everybody can personalise and can relate to more now than when we got into it. Well, I got into it in 99.
Fantastic. It's such a fast-paced industry, isn't it? So a lot of people, I moved into it just purely because, IT was great. I moved into IT to telecoms, and it was still the same as it was kind of 5-10 years back. And then I thought, they seem to be doing really well in security. Why? It's emerging, things were changing, and it can be quite daunting. A lot of people look at security, don't they, and they say, I'm a bit scared of it because I don't really understand it. When in actual fact, the fundamentals are quite simple. Yep. It's just which technology you go into. I don't think I know one person who is an expert in security.
No.
They're normally an expert in one particular area or one particular niche. So it's fascinating to hear kind of how people have got into the industry, and then I don't think anybody leaves. That's the scary thing. I think we all kind of move around. But in one form or another, it's actually quite a nice community. A lot of people know the tech, they know the people, they know obviously the different kind of moves and shakes. So moving into, and I'm going to, in a second, I'm actually going to introduce you to something in a minute that I've got sat beside me. But last question before we move into that, why Inbetween Fantastic? What the, from your point of view, what inspired you, again, a little bit like writing the book, to move into Inbetween Fantastic?
So when I was 10 or 11, I got picked for the British Olympic squad. And so I automatically had a coach, and everybody in the sports industry had a coach. And then as I got into my late 20s and I worked for organisations, the learning and development department would provide those special few with a mentor, and I got given one. And so over the years, I've always had a mentor or a coach, and there are two differences between it. And I looked at the last decade of my career and thought, actually, where were the moments when it was hard? What didn't I have? And I didn't have that person. But did I want to sign up to someone for 12 to 18 months, which is generally what you do when you go for this sort of mentorship? So I thought, Inbetween Fantastic, everybody has a moment of when they're in between fantastic. It can either be for one day or it can be for a whole year. But I just felt that there was something that I could bring from all of my career and all that I'd done, where a couple of colleagues had said to me, what are you going to do next? Why don't you go back to that thing that you're really good at, which is being someone's safe space where they can share an idea or brainstorm or talk about a problem with an account or talk about something they want to achieve, like write a book. They've not got anybody they can really talk to about it. And I was like, okay. And it simply came to me one night in the middle of the night, what are you doing right now? Well, I'm Inbetween Fantastic. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting name for a company. Googled it. It was available. And off I went. And it just seemed like putting, you put a plug and a connector together. It just went click. And I thought, I like this. And I think it's an easy thing to understand. People do know what it means to be Inbetween Fantastic. So,
definitely.
Yeah, that's how it came about.
And I think definitely think you've kind of got something there, that niche, and we're going to go into this a bit more detail, but definitely when you're looking at some of the work environments and the busy lifestyles, the pressures, the strains, the stresses, everything that people are under. And unless I'm completely unaware of this, but I'm not aware of any career path where people train you to be a salesperson. You hear the saying quite a bit, they've got the gift of the gab, or they're definitely a salesperson because of the way they either act or behave. But there doesn't seem to be any proper training courses. You have sales methodologies and you have sales frameworks, you have medic, you have e-value selling. I've definitely learned a lot, in particular over the last sort of 5-10 years of my career in sales. But I don't think there is anybody really that kind of warns you about the pressures and the strains and the stresses of
a day in the life
constantly hitting a target. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, and I remember one of my colleagues when I was working for App Dynamics, and I was sales enablement then, but I was called a sales coach, and he said, talking to you once a month is like having miniature sales therapy. Yeah. And it is, but to your point, the only way we learn is by watching others or by having a great leader. And that great leader teaches you the things that they were good at. Yeah. And if they were good at those things, then you're good at those things. So I think that's the point. And there are some, I think if you're a graduate and you're coming into it, there's plenty of organisations who will dip their toe in the water with you, chance their arm and send you off to an organisation of which, you're on sort of a contract. But if you're wanting to change career at 30 and you suddenly think, I really want to go and be a salesperson, you generally have to do that inside an organisation that you're currently working for. It's not seen today to employ someone who's got no sales experience. That's just not how it works, is it? So I think if that's something else that I can do to support people that have got a keen interest in it, then I'd love to do more with that.
Definitely. And also for the younger generation, I think that, we get so many people who go, I want to be in cybersecurity sales because that's where the money's at. Yes. And that's the first thing that people go, oh God, they make a lot of money in cybersecurity sales. Yes, they do, but there's also a lot of things that go with it. There's a lot to learn. Yeah. It does take experience. You can't just walk into it from day one. You can, but obviously you still have to build up to actually get some of the bigger deals and so on. So I think it's really important to focus on things like sales coaching, sales therapy, getting the most out of your team, and making sure that obviously they are positive and that they're obviously doing what they should be doing. So
it's confidence a lot of the end of the day. The thing we talk about in sales more than anything is, you hit it on the head. There's nobody who knows the 100% answer to everything all of the time. So there's always someone who knows something, but it's confidence. And if you're confident and you can articulate how you are going to solve a problem for someone, that's all sales is at the end of the day. Yeah. And yet they also do need to understand, to your point, cybersecurity is quite tricky. I remember having to learn the 7-layer OSI model, and I was like, what? Yeah. Because you don't need to know it anymore because you've got fantastic technical people supporting you. But you do still need to know the language, because that's how you associate with people, through language. So it's tough. It's
and
really
there are still those days where you jump on a call or you jump into a meeting and your technical person hasn't joined, or they're late to the meeting, or for whatever reason they can't make it. And if you don't know the basics,
hold your own.
Yeah, you've got. I mean, to some degree, I'll kind of know the basics, and then I'll say, they're better off talking to them because they know what they're the expert. But at the same time, you've got to understand what they're talking about, because you can't pick up on what's important to them, what are their business use cases or justifications.
You just don't look credible, and that's the point of it, particularly in security. You've got to look credible, haven't you?
Absolutely. So no, I totally with you, and I think it's fantastic. So we're going to delve into a little bit more. One of the things that I wanted to bring in just quickly is you probably remember Room 101.
I do.
Where you take a couple of things that you either want to put in the bin because maybe they're not needed anymore, you dislike them, whether it's popular or unpopular, it goes into the bin, and obviously we're going to discuss it. So I'm just going to bring the Cyber Chat bin onto the table now, and I'm going to ask you for 3 things that you would like to put into the bin, and we're going to just quickly talk about why. Why have you picked those 3 things? If somebody asked me, I'd have a long list, but from your point of view, top 3 things that you would like to go into the bin.
So I've actually chosen today melon of any variety. I've chosen tinsel, and much to most people's horror, Halloween. So those are my 3 things. So melon.
I'm intrigued now to know why.
So melon, I was as a child very fortunate to have grandparents who moved to Canada when I was 10, and so I went out there for most of my summer holidays. I think I just overindulged on melon of any sort. So I just think now it's like devil's food. It's like sweet cucumber. I don't see any point in it. And I can't stand the smell of it. I can't stand the consistency of it. So melon would be my thing.
Like it.
And then I think the feeling of tinsel, it's a bit like running your fingers down the blackboard. I just can't do it anymore. It's just like, oh,
do you know, I've heard a couple of people say that exact same thing.
Oh, it's that feeling of, even now just talking about it. And then I think Halloween's never really been anything I've enjoyed. And when I talk to my US friends who absolutely love it, they will get excited literally from October the 1st. Out comes the boxes. And the whole of October, they are building. Wow. This whole Halloween, the house is lit up, they're doing parties. But then what happens is, as soon as they get to Thanksgiving, they switch straight into Christmas. Oh, gosh, and I just think that your house is going to be decorated completely from the 1st of October, and then goes right the way through till Christmas, and then doesn't come down again until January. And I think, oh my God, that would just drive me insane. So yeah, Halloween for me, I just don't get it. I don't understand what's the point of it. But
it's funny because the different people that you talk to, I mean, I don't kind of celebrate Halloween in a big way, but definitely with the pumpkin carving, it gets very competitive in our house. That's the only thing that we do.
I can imagine.
And it's, if we're not either divorced or not talking to each other, then it's the pumpkin carving that has caused it. But do you know what? I totally get that. I love your 3 answers. So feel free, stick those 3 in the cyber chat bin. Thank you very much. He's going to take that away now. So I guess, going back into the real kind of reason that we're here and talking about Inbetween Fantastic, I think it's actually quite important to talk on a number of reasons why people would also like to, for that sales therapy and also for coaching. We obviously met working together, but I think, a lot of our career history is very similar.
Yes.
Going from that direct sales, or when I mean direct sales, I mean as in, selling to end users, end customers, building that relationship with a potential customer. I think for me, having to hit a target month after month or quarter after quarter, and, those targets, they can be very high, they were several millions by the time, obviously, I moved over to Channel. And I think people don't tend to not realise, but it's more a case of, I don't think people tend to think about the burnout, the pressures, the exhaustion that a lot of people find. There is one saying in the industry, and it's not just in cybersecurity, it's across the board. Everybody says you're only as good as your last number or your last figure, which, again, totally agree with, but I think it's looking at the person behind it. So I guess, my question to you would be, how would something like Inbetween Fantastic look at the ways in which people are burnt out and kind of address it, really?
Yeah, I think so. I've gone through burnout a couple of times. I think it's more relevant to when I had the headhunting business, is that you could tell how burnt out someone was by the amount of times that they contacted you to change job. And if you've got a great relationship with a headhunter, you'll call them for advice, you'll call them to talk about the market. But you yourself, we go to InfoSec, and it's very hard to get out of the industry. But one year you'll see them standing on that stand, and then the next year they're on someone else's stand, and so it goes on. So I think that's a common theme, is if you see people change jobs quite quickly, it's usually the avoidance of admitting burnout and trying to deal with it by thinking, well, I'll get that month off, or even that 2 month off if I'm put on gardening leave, gives me a chance to refocus, and off I go again. But they don't change the role. So the role doesn't change, just the company, the car, the product, the boss, probably the salary, but actually nothing else changes. Yeah. And so that's the thing I think that people need to focus on, is can they address burnout in the first place? And I think, you also know when you're going into sales that it's going to be quite stressful, but are you allowed to be in an environment where you can fail? Yeah. And then just set that fail to help you improve upon it, not be taunted by it or feel shameful by it. And I think that's the thing, is burnout is so difficult to describe, but a lot of the time burnout comes down to fear of failure and shame, and showing a vulnerability and not being dealt with in the right manner. So I think that for me would be how I would sum it up.
Definitely. And it's, I guess, you wouldn't be competitive phrase it the other way, you wouldn't be in sales if you weren't competitive. Correct. And I think a lot of people, unless you are number one, unless you're hitting your figures, if you are slightly low or you feel yourself falling behind, there is always that kind of pressure or that worry of thinking, God, I'm bottom of the scoreboard, or I'm not hitting my target. Does it mean I remember kind of going back to, a couple of my previous roles, and a lot of the time it was, I really want to make this, I really want to do this. But then you suddenly get to a point where you're under so much pressure, they actually start to self-doubt.
Correct.
And think, God, can I actually even sell? You know, am I any good at this? Yeah. And it's if it's something that you've done since you were kind of 18, 19 years old, what do I do next? So what kind of piece of advice would you give to people who do get to that stage and kind of think, do you know what, sales is all I've ever known?
Yeah.
You know, deep down that they are good at sales, but they do get to that point where they think, I just need that little bit of motivation, or I do need that little bit of, you know, kind of, I don't know, I suppose sort of more, not enablement, but a little bit more motivation to actually go and do what they should be doing, really.
Well, I think your first point is the competitiveness, right? We are born in sales to be competitive, but actually the person we compete with the most is ourselves.
Yeah.
And a lot of salespeople won't acknowledge that. They think they're competing with their team, or they think they're competing with another region, but actually deep down, every salesperson, that's why they're a salesperson, is competing with themselves. So that's how it resonates to the fact that you say you're only as good as your last deal or your last quarter. That's not the case, actually. You're only as good as your next quarter. And so, to your point, it's the confidence bit that matters. It's self-sabotage is so easy. Your brain talks, I think, 40,000 times faster than your mouth. And it's constantly on and it never sleeps. And I think that people talk about mindfulness and meditation. But I posted recently this week that I do and have suffered from anxiety. And there is a breathing technique that I've started using which works really well. And it sounds really odd, but it does work. And it's the breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 6, hold for 2. If you do that 5 times, it completely reprograms your mind. Now, is that something that all corporates do? Not necessarily. But is that something that you could do yourself? Take yourself up into the corner of a room before you're about to go to a meeting, get on a call. Can you practice some of those that just allow your brain to recalibrate? Because then you get that moment of clarity, and then you can stop self-sabotaging, and then you can get back into good competitive spirit. Yeah. Or, to your point, get some sales therapy, get a sales coach, find a mentor, talk to a colleague in a trusted environment. And that, you know, you're then not going to feel too vulnerable about doing something like that.
And I think it's also, you know, having somebody independent, you know, rather than
that's the bit.
Feeling if you're going to go to a manager or, you know, I am struggling, or not even you're struggling, I need a little bit of motivation, going to an independent person and go, you can do this, you know, maybe think about these kind of pointers.
It's exactly that. You know, I used to focus, the sweet spot for me was sales leadership. And the reason why is that you don't want to tell your partner. You don't want to tell your team. You don't want to tell the management above you. You don't want to tell... You want to have somebody that you can talk to. And again, it's either going to be somebody in HR, but do you want to always talk to HR about how you're feeling? Do you want to talk to sales enablement about how you're feeling? So sometimes it's quite nice to be able to just have that check-in. Have someone that you can call. You can book a session. I offer 30-minute discovery sessions for people, because sometimes all you need is that 30-minute call, and off you go. You've reset and you're set up for the day.
Brilliant. No, I think it's more than valuable to have something like that in place at an organisation. So I'm going to mention the kind of the age thing here, and what I mean by that is, if I go right back to when I started selling, you know, 18, 19 years old, you mentioned things like Yellow Pages. I mean, my way of getting a prospect or a customer was the Financial Times, Yellow Pages, you know, any company with a telephone number that I could call up. This is definitely showing my age. But you know, that was the way that you got hold of people. You called them, probably out of 10 or 50 calls, you'd get the odd lead, you get to speak to them, you go to meet them. And that, for me, I think, you know, it wasn't always a good lead. You know, sometimes they were smaller organisations, but it was good to actually have that connection with people. Now, if we sort of fast forward to selling nowadays, we know it's kind of bridging the gap between sales and marketing, but we know between, you know, if you're cold calling, very few people pick up, especially because people are home working. If you look at email marketing, it's less than 1% because people get so many. Even platforms like LinkedIn, where people are messaging people, some people don't even pick up their messages. So sales has become harder. My question to you is, you know, how much harder is that for elder people versus younger people? They obviously have the same challenge, but, and this is kind of a funny thing here, at what age did things in the office change, and how difficult is it for the older generation of salespeople to cope with that change?
I think so. I talked to some salespeople this week who are in their 20s, and they've already jumped on the AI wagon. and they're already using it to great effect, right? But then you have to look at that multi-layered approach to the stuff we learnt way back before there was the IT or internet, which were senses. You sell to the senses, don't you?
Yep.
And whether it's changed or not, it's still usually 6 or 7 approaches before somebody will cave in and call you back or cave in and respond. So that hasn't really changed.
Yeah.
But I think it's the level of the dynamic of the relationship. And I think to your point, I noticed a decade ago how things had shifted, because I'd gone from being in security to going into other industries, and coming back into security was when I probably noticed it. But I think it's that trying to meet every letter of diversity.
Yeah.
That's the bit that's really hard. We either swing completely one way or we swing the other, but we don't look at trying to get a balance. And that's the bit I think, for me, the importance is the balance. And I think that does bring wisdom. You do need some longevity in years to understand that you need that balanced approach. But again, it depends on your audience. If you're 20-something and you're selling to somebody who's 20-something, great match. But in our part of life, we've got a whole spectrum of age, backgrounds, culture, location. We have to think about it all. And I think we actually benefit more because we've had that experience of not having it and then having it.
Yeah. And I spoke to one of a CISO last week, works for an investment company, and he basically said I already knew, but it was interesting to hear it obviously direct from an end user. And he said, I very rarely now go on LinkedIn, or I very rarely check my messages, because I know that I have 20, 30, 40 different people messaging me. And he said the most disturbing thing that I find is, he said, particularly with certain generations, is that if they don't get a response within 24 hours or 48 hours, I get a question mark, or I get a, did you see my message? It's very, very quick. Whereas I guess older, and again, I'm showing my age again here, but I think we're used to people not coming back instantly. We're not, it is a mind shift. And I think also from an office perspective, I used to love getting up, putting on a suit, getting smartly dressed, going to work. You had that feeling of home versus work life. A lot of people now, I think, struggle with how offices have changed. So I guess, again, my question back to you would be, how has the kind of the office home environment affected a lot of people, and it's how do we get people back into that work culture again when they've been so used to being at home for so long?
I think the thing I've noticed, certainly when we talk about the mental health thing and some of my clients, is the loneliness epidemic that we've had, and that people just missed the collaboration, but then found that they were probably more profitable with their time as they got used to working from home. And then it was, people were asking, what would you do with that extra 3 hours that you got in the day when you weren't travelling? And people were like, you'd be amazed what I could get done. And then it was missing the brainstorming and coming into the office and the camaraderie. You can't get that over Zoom.
No.
So, and I think that now we read so many articles on, you talk about LinkedIn, because I used to be such a lover of LinkedIn, and now I find it one of many tools I have to use. And I think that you need to give people a purpose to come into an office environment, but that office environment's got to change. I'm seeing more and more studies about people needing to have their own space to work in, not the open office anymore. Lots of people need, how many people do you see going to offices to do meetings? They don't sit at the desk, it's too noisy. I think, having worked from home for a couple of years, people are like almost embarrassed to make a phone call in front of people. Whereas we would be on our mobile
pacing
phones,
up and down,
the
kind of, but it used to be busy, like loud, busy, vibrant. Now it's very quiet. You feel like you're walking into a library.
You're interrupting
sometimes.
people, don't you? Oh God, I'm going to make a call. So I think for me, it's that whole kind of, customers don't know how to respond anymore. We knew as a salesperson how to sell, and we would have to wait, and then we'd have to write another really good email, send them another bit of literature, and then they would respond. Now I think they're inundated, and I think, oh my God, I don't know what it's like. I've had a couple of those responses on LinkedIn where that lady has thought I've accidentally wanted a presentation and I didn't, and then I get are you ignoring me? No.
You think, gosh, it's all, and I think also the sales process has changed. A lot of people, particularly in the sales environment, I mentioned to you, the last five, maybe 7 years of really learning sales. And by that, I mean, before, obviously when I was a lot younger, it was the more calls I can make, the more emails I can make, let's, speak to people. And people generally bought they, you went to them and said, look, this technology is really great. Okay, maybe I've got a bit of budget. You're okay. I'm not saying it was that easy, but it was easier. Now, what I basically used to find was with sales, with the help of things like eValue selling, medic selling, you're actually putting yourself in their shoes and saying, if I was them, why would I buy? If I had £100,000, why would I spend it on that technology? You might be telling me I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but actually, and I'll always take it back to the analogy of a car. If I'm in the market for a family car, okay, I might be swayed slightly if somebody offered me a Porsche or Ferrari, but actually, if I'm after a family car and somebody's trying to sell me a two-seater, it's not going to work. No. And I think that idea of sales coaching, sales therapy, so that kind of motion is put yourself in the position of the people who are buying, and it's not always one person now; it's multiple people.
Multiple people.
So again, we're kind of going back to a question from your point of view is from Inbetween fantastic. What are the services that you'll be offering to organisations, and how can you help with the kind of the sales process and the sales people to make them successful and to kind of go on that journey?
90% of the companies I deal with have already got, to your point, a baked-in sales methodology or a sales operating model. I pride myself on what I would call an operating rhythm, and I look at return on investment. So, to your point, it's something like 15 people now from a customer's standpoint involved in a deal, but actually it's doubled from the vendor's point of view. So if you look at the average size of an account team, it used to be 4 or 5, now it's 6 to 12. So it's more about project management as a salesperson. So I think first of all, when I work with organisations, I want to find out what is their operating rhythm, what's not working, what is working, and then is it the fact that they've got high potentials and they don't know how to up-level them, or is it a fundamental change program inside an organisation where they've trained out medic, but it's just not a common language? And therefore sales are sent into another training room and they're taught medic, but medic's not used in the forecast, it's not used in a deal clinic, it's not used in the close plan, it's not used in the account plan, it's not used in the marketing, it's not used in the... If you're going to use a tool like medic, you need to seed it out like it's English or American or Italian, or you have to use it like that. So those are the things that I offer to the corporate side. And then on an individual side, really, it's more about what is it that you want to achieve, or where are you in between? Where are you not so fantastic? And like I always say, are you in? Are you between? Are you in between? Or are you just fantastic? And actually, one of the things I want to start doing, Catherine, and I think you'll love this too, is I want to get good salespeople together who've got a lot to give. You remember when I used to run some of my sessions, I'd bring in those really great salespeople who would talk about a day in the life of. And I'd love to start running masterminds where people can jump in on these calls and almost have a session of, I've got this £5-6 million deal and it's like going a little bit pear-shaped and I'd really like to know what to do. So those are the sorts of things that I think that we can offer at Inbetween Fantastic.
And I think there, in your questions, when you ask a lot of salespeople, I bet there's quite a few of them that say, I am fantastic. When actually, really, they're not. No. And it's just kind of that, like you say, that safe space where they can actually go, do you know what? I am fantastic, but do you know what, at the moment, I need that little bit of, or I'm slightly worried about this deal. It shouldn't be a problem if you have a supportive manager and somebody who's going to kind of guide you through that process. But how do I kind of get to that closure?
Asking for help as a salesperson is the hardest thing when it comes to your own ability. Asking for help to get a technical answer, asking help from a channel partner, asking help from sales operations, asking help from leadership, but actually asking for help around your own skill set. One of the hardest. There's not many people that will come to you and ask you for help, and I think that's a shame, because that's the bit where you won't have to ask so many people if you can find that place, that safe space, as you say, where you could phone up and say, do you know, I really need to handle some objections better, and I don't know how, or I really want a safe place to practice the new corporate pitch, because it's just been rolled out and we've got this, acquisition, and I need to know how to roll it in. And I'd love to do that with people. So I think that's something that people could do, and it's an expensive asset for a company to employ someone to purely do that. So, to have this sort of drop-in mentality, which I like to have, I think that would also be a good service for people.
Fantastic. And it's, I guess you're leaning in on your experience and your knowledge and all the kind of the the history of working within not just cybersecurity as an industry, but sales as a whole. I think that's really beneficial. So where do you kind of, I said sort of, where do you see yourself, but where do you see sort of Inbetween Fantastic in the future? Where do you kind of would like to see it grow in the future?
So when I first, if I can tell you the story of how it sort of came about, really. So when I did suffer with burnout at the end of last year, and I got quite sick, I knew that there was a change coming. But at the same time I came up with Inbetween Fantastic, I actually took myself off to a business retreat, stroke spiritual retreat, where I got to hang out with some good and great female leaders. And whilst we were brainstorming around our businesses, another company name came into my head, which was Epiphany Central. So Inbetween Fantastic is the journey to Epiphany Central. So you get the key, you turn the key on in the ignition, and off you go. You're in Inbetween Fantastic and you're on a journey. But you land at Epiphany Central. And Epiphany Central is where your idea sort of comes to life. And so I call it, Epiphany Central is like the ideal platform, or your ideal platform is what I do it. So for me, it's about building up collaborations of people. So for instance, I don't want to do all of this myself, so I've got a set of people who I work with. Let's say, for instance, one of my sales leaders decides that he wants to be a chief operating officer. He's not naturally going to go and get a chief operating officer role because they see him as a chief revenue officer, or they'll see him as an upcoming SVP. So I need to then find the mentor or the right professional coach to put him with so that he can go on. And then the day that he's landed at Epiphany Central is the day that he accepts the job as the COO. So that's kind of the mentality of the business. So that's where I want to see it going.
Amazing.
Really.
And I think it's I think everybody needs it. It's just, like you said, timing is everything, and it depends on what stage they're at in their journey, what stage they are in the cycle. So
people just don't invest in themselves. You know, we invest in our houses, we invest in cars, we invest in our wardrobes, and we invest in holidays. But when do we actually invest and up-level ourselves and our own abilities? We don't. You know, for the first time, it was the first time I've done it in years this year. And I was like, why have I waited so long to spend some money on my own brain and my own health and my own attitude?
We're too busy in the moment, aren't we? I had a wellbeing day last week and I spent it working.
There you go, see?
So it's I think it's a drug on it, you know.
I think it's an era thing. You know, you said earlier about our age. I think it's the way in which we were schooled. I was never told to not work harder.
Absolutely.
Always told to work harder. In fact, somebody said to me this week that their strategy for success was good, better, best. And I just rolled my eyes and thought, that's probably the last thing you should be doing, because you're just driving yourself constantly. Maybe you need to look at it and just say, isn't good enough?
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question, any key takeaways, I guess, for individuals, businesses? I mean, obviously, I think what would be quite nice is, you know, salespeople actually taking Inbetween Fantastic to their companies. As well as obviously companies realising obviously that they need that. So are there any key takeaways for either a salesperson or a business that you would kind of like to leave them with?
I think for me, it's Inbetween Fantastic is a place you'll always be at. And if you're not, you're kidding yourself. So first of all, I think be honest. Vulnerability was thrown around like the new sweet last year. But actually, I would like to say to people, take care of your own mental health. But address that mental health. We talked about it earlier. I get a signal when I've got burnout. Look for your own signals. Don't wait until it's over. But also, I think, you know, sales is a really, really wonderful role. And I don't think people should look at it as a stressful career path. It's actually a very positive career path. And there's so many things that you can do and enjoy it. Don't look at it like a stressful role. I think that would be my thing, is that we sort of think, oh God, sales is so hard. It isn't. It's as hard as you make it, or as hard as you feel it should be.
Enjoy the parts that you enjoy and less of the...
and you've got to love people, let's be honest. Don't get into sales if you don't love people.
And I think there's a few salespeople that perhaps don't like people, but that's a whole different podcast that we could probably go into. So, well, fine. You know, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. It's lovely to see you again. I'm super excited for obviously everything that Inbetween Fantastic goes on from here and there, and I know you'll do very well. I wish you every success.
We should do that book together now.
I think we do. We definitely need to do a book. There's so many things we can write about.
Exactly.
No, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like I mentioned before, loved having Emma on in this particular episode. I really hope that obviously we're going to do another one again in the future. Join us for the next episode.